some days I will have a lovely meal and then I'll be hit by an absolute wave of tiredness and I'll have no idea why, and it'll get in the way of me doing things. If let's say I want to work out, maybe I want to do some work, it will completely nuke my ability to do pretty much anything. And I'm sure other people experience this as well. Perhaps others it's not so bad, perhaps others it's worse. There are reasons for this, and it's actually quite easy to avoid, and now I avoid it. So I'll tell you exactly how I do that. I'll begin, however, by talking about obvious things, because they need to be brought up. If you're not sleeping enough, if you're not drinking enough, if you're eating horrible processed foods, things like this, if you're doing drugs, if you're drinking, that's going to affect you a lot more than what I'm going to talk about. So sort those things out first, and then you can move on to these things. But this is still extremely important, and it's an incredibly large driver of this food coma, post-meal drowsiness. I'll begin by explaining exactly how post-meal drowsiness happens, what causes it, what pathways, like what hormones are running through your body. So we'll work at the end, or from the end, and we'll pull back and figure out exactly, well, why does this happen? So there is a hormone called melatonin. I'm pretty sure everyone knows it's the sleep hormone. You take melatonin pills and then you fall asleep more quickly. What melatonin does is it basically decreases your motor activity, it induces fatigue, and it lowers your body temperature, which makes you a lot more drowsy. That's exactly what it does. So now, how do we get from food to melatonin? It starts with something called tryptophan. It's an amino acid which is found in protein-rich foods, because obviously protein, amino acids. I'll put up a little chart of foods that are high in it. And obviously you're seeing, well, things like chicken, turkey, beef, pork, salmon, milk. These are all foods eggs, these are all foods that are extremely important to me, that are really, really healthy. I don't want to cut them out. And you shouldn't have to. You don't have to. Because it's not that simple. Tryptophan it's essentially, it's too big to be absorbed by the blood-brain barrier preferentially. So smaller amino acids, excuse me, will be absorbed first. So it's got lots of competition. Well, what will increase its odds of being absorbed? Well, this is where we bring in carbs. So with carbohydrates, what happens when you consume them is your insulin is spiked. So whether it's sugar, and that's quite a lot, or something like peas, which is not as much. We'll go into specifics about this in a little bit later. But first I'll just stick to the strict exactly what happens. So insulin spikes. Well, what does insulin do? Insulin, essentially, it helps amino acids and proteins go into cells. So what happens is all of these smaller amino acids are hurried into cells, which increases the proportion of tryptophan in the blood, which means it has less competition to go through the blood-brain barrier. Now you have a bunch of tryptophan in your brain. What now? By the way, the blood-brain barrier goes all the way down. It's not like a little thing in your head. It's the central nervous system. So, tryptophan isn't just a precursor of serotonin. It also stimulates the synthesis of serotonin. So the more tryptophan, you will get a bunch more serotonin. Who cares about that? Well, serotonin is converted into melatonin in the pineal gland. So there you go. That's exactly how this drowsiness will set in. But there are a few little things to do with it that, once you know them, things make a lot more sense, and dealing with it makes a lot more sense. For example, carbs cause this stuff to happen, but different carbs affect you in different amounts. So how do you know which carbs to eat? Well, there's something called glycemic index, glycemic load, and there is a glycemic index that has a list of these foods. So let's say, for example, you've got, I've got the list up here. Let's take asparagus. It's got a glycemic index of 15. Then you have something like oatmeal, which has a glycemic index of 87. So oatmeal has got a higher glycemic index than asparagus, which means it'll spike insulin more. So what do we do with this? Well, that's glycemic index, but glycemic load is specifically how much you're taking in. So if you had 5 grams of oatmeal, but you had 100 grams of asparagus, the glycemic load of the asparagus would actually be higher because there's more. It's a bit like calories, you know. You can have a tiny little amount of sugar, which will be less calories than a big amount of chicken. But obviously, per unit of weight, one has got more than the other. So bear that in mind. So you want to focus on having carbs that have got a lower glycemic index. So, I mean, I'll just read a few off the list here. You've got grapefruit, you've got asparagus, broccoli, celery, lettuce, cucumber, peppers, that sort of stuff. Not processed sugary things. It's not just carbs that have got glycemic index though. You've also got dairy, proteins. Everything has got some amount of glycemic load. So, for example, low-fat yogurt, 14. Kidney beans, 41. Well, that is kind of a carb. Milk, fat-free, is 32. So bear in mind the glycemic load. The higher the glycemic load, the more insulin that will be spiked, which will result in more tryptophan going through the blood-brain barrier, which will result in more melatonin being produced, and you will become more drowsy. So the first fix is avoid high GI foods and high glycemic loads. That's simple. Don't have much sugar, and be careful when you're choosing which carbs to eat. Next up, avoid large meals, because just because you've picked out a food, so let's say, for example, whole milk is 27, that's not too high, but if you have a litre of it, that's quite a lot. So have smaller portions. Next up, this is where we're getting into the kind of biohacking stuff, which is quite interesting. So exposure to light acutely inhibits melatonin synthesis. So what does this mean? Well, right after you eat, get out, get some bright light. This is through your eyes. It's not like through the skin or something, through your eyes. Go out and enjoy some sunlight. Another thing that ties into that very, very synergistically is enterogastrone hormones. I have to look to read that word because it's a big word and I don't know it off by heart. When you move after eating, you combat the effects of these enterogastro hormones. There we go, nailed it, one take. And so what this means is, what these hormones do essentially is they bring more blood into your digestive tract away from, well, your brain and the rest of your body, so you become more drowsy. There's another part. This is specifically for glucose, which is that it inhibits orexin. And orexin promotes wakefulness. So again, that ties into the first tip, avoid high GI foods. Now, lastly, and this is something to bear in mind, This is to do with the circadian rhythm. Everyone knows that the circadian rhythm goes up, down, and you're more wakeful during the day than you are at night. That's why it's a bad idea to sleep during the day and be awake during the night, and that's why night shift workers have so many problems. However, there is a dip in the circadian rhythm at around about 1 to 3 p.m., that kind of area, maybe 4. It changes from person to person because your circadian rhythm is set based on when you wake up, so it'll be different. And what this does essentially is it amplifies what happens to your hormones, so at least how you feel it. So let's say, for example, I have a moderate glycemic load at 11 in the morning. Well, I'm wakeful, I'm alert. It's, it'll dip my alertness and my wakefulness a little bit, but it's not the end of the world. Now let's say I do that same thing at 2:30 in the afternoon. Well, what's going to happen is the effect of the tryptophan that's been moved from my blood into my brain, turned into serotonin and then melatonin, added on to the circadian low, will mean that I will get walloped by an absolutely massive wave of fatigue. And this is something that I noticed. I noticed, why is it that I'm a lot more tired in the mid-afternoon when I eat than at actual dinner time when I should be tired? That's why. So a tip for that is I try to avoid eating carbs around that area. See, the thing about tryptophan is it's stored in the blood. A lot of it is bound to albumin, so it doesn't. That's not serum. Serum means free. When you hear people like Derek from More Plates, More Dates talk about serum testosterone, that just means free in the blood. Serum means free in the blood. So serum tryptophan, free tryptophan that can actually cross the barrier. Right, so I just lost my train of thought like 3 times in the space of 2 minutes for the same exact thing. The word serum came into my mind, and then everything that came before that was wiped. What I was talking about is storage of tryptophan in the blood, which is stored either serum, which is free, so it can go and move about, or bound to albumin. Albumin is it's a protein. It's what you have in egg white. So this tryptophan is stored. So let's say, for example, I eat a load of tryptophan high food for breakfast. That tryptophan will be in my blood until the high glycemic load food will spike the insulin, and then the smaller amino acids are dispersed into cells, and then the tryptophan can go through the blood-brain barrier, and then I get hit by the tiredness. So just because you haven't eaten a tryptophan high food in a while doesn't mean that it's not there. It is there. It is the glycemic load that will essentially unlock it. It doesn't unlock it. It just scurries other things away. So there's more space for it to go through the blood-brain barrier. So knowing these things, go for walks after you eat, bright light exposure, don't have carbs, or glycemic load I should say, right when you're in a circadian low, so right in the afternoon, or just in general. What I'll do is I'll have a lot of my carbs at dinner time. My breakfast will be protein, fat heavy throughout the day. I might have a few fruit, a few berries, nothing too heavy in carbs, but then I'll have a lot at dinner time. And lastly, avoid having meals that are too large if you are going to have those meals throughout the day. So what you might want to do instead is have a big breakfast, have a few little snacks throughout the day, and then have a large dinner. That's sort of what I do. But again, it depends on yourself, your schedule, and what you can possibly do. So I hope this explains how you end up in a food coma, what's going on, and of course, more importantly, how to combat it. Thank you for watching.